Welcome back to Rhythm Section Life, Conversations with Masters. Here, we don't just talk drums. We dive deep into the culture, the history, and personal journeys that brought our guests to the world stage. We have some incredible conversations lined up for you. To keep up with our latest videos, tour dates, and exclusive behind-the-scenes content, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Don't forget to like this video and join the conversation in the comments below. Joining us this week is the great, the educator, the historian, and the great drummer, the one and only Daniel Glass. Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have such a huge respect for all of your work as a drummer, educator, and historian, and I'm excited to talk to you today and learn about your fascinating journey. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm happy to see you in your new role as podcaster,
Yeah.
which is totally cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it seems like you're having a lot of fun with it, so that's good.
Yeah. So starting at 8 years old, most of us are just trying to hit the drums hard and make noise. So looking back on your youngest years on the kit, do you see any early signs of deep curiosity and the analytical mindset that eventually led you to be the historian you are today?
Honestly, to be frank, not really. I started taking lessons at 7, and it was, I liked playing drums, but my parents said, if you're going to play drums, you have to study, timpani and snare drum. So I did the Revue book and all that stuff, private lessons for 5 years before I ever got a drum set. I was not a good student. I enjoyed playing in the band, but I was not, I can't really say that form of drumming was a passion. However, when I was 12, my parents finally got me my first drum set. I joined my first band, and then I was all over it. And so I think it was more of a passion thing. Sort of throughout junior high and high school, I did every kind of band you could do. I was in rock bands, but I did marching band, jazz band. I did all the shows. It was just my thing,
Right.
But it wasn't really until I went to some really good schools. I went to this private school in Hawaii called Punahou, which is where Barack Obama went, and the guy who started AOL, Steve Case, is an alumni, and Piero Midiar, who started eBay, was in my homeroom. It was a pretty heavyweight school. I got a great education there, and then I thought I was going to be a psychologist like my father, and I went and got a psychology degree at Brandeis University in Boston area, which I think that's where the more analytical training, research abilities, all that came in. And after that, I really didn't want to go on with academia. I was burned out, and I decided the summer after I graduated college I was in Boston, so there were amazing musicians around, and I studied with a guy named Bob Gulati, who was not a household name in the drumming world, but in Boston, he was. He was a Berkeley student who'd studied under Alan Dawson. He knew Steve Smith. He knew Pat Metheny. I mean, he was an incredible, incredible drummer. And I think most importantly, I would go to his house, and he had a regular house. He happened to live in Waltham, which is where Brandeis was. It was a suburb of Boston. So it was easy for me to get to him because I didn't have a car. And he was just like a dude with a wife and 2 kids paying a mortgage. And I was like, oh, you mean you could actually just have a regular life as a musician? I didn't know that was possible. Yeah. So then I really got into it. And once I joined Royal Crown Revue and started kind of having my eyes and ears open to the whole world of evolution of music and the evolution of drums, I began to apply the analytical and research and writing skills that I had learned in my whole life of going to heavyweight schools. And so it was kind of a great way to combine the passion for drumming with all the work I had done in school,
It makes sense because for me, my major is anthropology, and it was cultural anthropology. And so the reason I wanted to start a podcast is to document people's journeys of what brought them to where they were today. And, when I take lessons from Johnny Vodakovich, he would talk about
being on tour with Professor Longhair and like how
Can't
they
even
wrote
imagine.
songs together. And so it is documenting pieces of history. And so I think that's kind of the same experience for me. It's cool.
It is cool. And that's, you know, what really pushed me hard towards, I mean, I did sort of regular research. I, you know, did a lot of reading and read a lot of music biographies. So I was always, like you, interested in people's stories. And then I began to meet the drummers that had influenced the music that Royal Crown Revue was playing, the swing band that I was in. And once I started doing that, I started interviewing people and really began to get serious about documenting their history and their story. And that was very exciting, you know, because I just realized that nobody was talking about the history of our instrument. And it was an amazing history, an amazing story, you know.
Right.
So in the Century Project DVD that I did, and in all the different products that I put out, I try to kind of lay it out as a fascinating story or a journey. And I think it makes it more acceptable or palatable to people.
It was fascinating. One of my favorite parts in that is talking about where brushes came from fly swatters.
Oh, yeah.
It's so cool.
It is so cool. It's amazing.
Yeah. So.
Which, you know, just to the concept of a brush, which is metal wires inside a retractable handle, was patented as a fly swatter already back in 1913. And I show in the Century Project you have some patent drawings behind you on the wall.
Yeah.
So
yes.
I show the patent drawing of the fly swatter with the retractable handle. Of course, there was not a rubber sheath around it. It was wood, but there was no plastic in 1913. And having a series of wire, essentially a wire brush, allowed you to kill flies. It was an effective way to do it. So, you know, that's one of the cool things about the evolution of the drum set. People don't realize it wasn't top down. It wasn't like, you know, the people at the companies are sitting around going, well, let's see here. I think drummers could benefit from having, you know, a brush. I mean, it was the drummers going, damn, I need to play quietly. I need something that imitates the sound of a dancer. Oh, check it out. I take this fly swatter, and on the calf head, it sounds really beautiful if you sweep it. And, you know, you can imitate the sound of sticks, and you can imitate the sound of you can make a very legato sound that's almost more like a dancer. And dancers at that time, there was something called sand dancing. Famous clip of Bill Bojangles Robinson, the famous legendary dancer of the 1930s and 40s. And it's in a movie, and he has a big pocket full of sand. And when he goes to dance, he's on the deck of a ship sailing up the Mississippi in the film, and he tosses sand out on the deck and uses it to get a sweep sound with his foot. You know, so drummers were listening to these things, and it's no accident that Papa Joe Jones, who's sort of the drummer who is credited with, he didn't invent the brushes, but he began to use them the way that we use them today. He was the first to kind of bring that very conversational, articulate aspect to them. It's no accident that he grew up in vaudeville, so he was around dancers, and, you know, was trying to connect with the dancers. I mean, that was a huge part of what drummers did at that time, was work with onstage performers.
And dancers in the audience too. And I think a lot of people forget, like, the early swing stuff that was for dancing. It was for social interaction
100%.
And date nights. And so that playing on that 2 and 4 was really important to have the downbeat, you know, in the early part of jazz, because the dancers needed that to do their thing.
If you go back to the beginning of jazz, where it really exploded in the very end of the 19-teens, and kind of went nationwide in the 20s, it's interesting because there's sort of technological factors, there's sociological factors, there's economic factors, there's historical factors, and they all play in to why it became so popular. So first of all, the government of Louisiana shut down Storyville, which was kind of like the Vegas of its time. It was the black neighborhood in the French Quarter where all the vice happened. So if and the reason partially for that is because it was a big port and sailors were coming in after being in the Spanish-American War and in Cuba and, all of that stuff. And so it allowed a place for jazz to evolve because jazz, of course, initially was African-American music, and the only place where African-American musicians could play for so many years was in red light districts and bordellos and brothels and things. And of course, there were no, it was like a salon. If you recall the movie Pretty Baby, I don't know if you remember from the 70s, where Brooke Shields was playing a teenage prostitute and she was like 14. A little probably
risque.
Wouldn't get made today. But that was Brooke Shields' initial introduction to the world, was playing a teenage prostitute. Anyway, but you had these houses of ill repute, and there would be a salon downstairs, and while the men were waiting, there would be dancing and there would be music, and that's really where ragtime evolved, jazz evolved, things like that. So that's sort of a historical sociological issue that sets it up. And then jazz really explodes because Prohibition happens in 1919. So basically the only people manufacturing alcohol are the mob, and the mob rises to prominence. And if you're going to have an illegal club with illegal, liquor in it, you want to have illegal music essentially as well. Music that is, think of hip hop or any kind of underground. It was underground music. It was dangerous. It was not mainstream, but it was danceable as hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so the combination of Prohibition and, the fact that a lot of the African-American musicians left New Orleans when they shut down Storyville because there was no place left to play, went up the Mississippi, went to Kansas City, went to Chicago, out to New York. And that's why jazz exploded, because you had also recording technology. So the original Dixieland Jazz Band makes the first official jazz recordings. And you talked about 2 and 4. One of the unique elements of how African Americans interpreted European American, say, classical or folk music is putting the emphasis on the backbeat, right? What we call the backbeat, 2 and 4, as opposed to the 1 and 3, right? Which is a European, if you think of classical music, so it's very downbeat oriented. So the fact of syncopation meets the offbeat suddenly was like, whoa, this music is like, is it on the downbeat? Is it on the offbeat? It's on both. And it's just so eminently danceable. So, you could see just in that one little time period, all these things contribute to the explosion of jazz, which then, of course, leads to everything else over time.
And, one of the most beautiful aspects, I think, is, for instance, like Freddie Green, and the Count Basie Orchestra, and just like the guitar at that time, or the banjo, is part of the rhythm section. And when you have the bass and drums and guitar, and then sometimes the piano, just being part of that, playing that backbeat and being part of the rhythm section, it's magical.
It is.
It's like this magical force.
They defined the feeling of American music. I mean, they were so famous, they had their own name. They were called the All-American Rhythm Section, where the only other rhythm section I can think of that has its own name is Double Trouble with Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Okay.
But I don't know. I can't think of too many rhythm. I mean, you had the different musicians in the recording studios. You had the Swampers in Muscle Shoals, and you had the Funk Brothers in, so I guess that might count. But I mean, just the rhythm section by itself, the Basie Band defined it. And here's what's so amazing. You have to remember when the big bands took off in the 1930s, the mid-30s, the explosion of this music was so huge that they built these swing palaces. So you had the Steel Pier, you had the Savoy Ballroom, you had Roseland Ballroom, you had, every major city had a giant, I mean, they could hold 5,000 people. The demand was that big. Now you think about these big bands, there was no amplification. They didn't have guitar amps until the end of the 30s and electric guitars. They maybe had one microphone up front for the vocalist. That was it. And if there was an instrumental solo, the trumpets were probably loud enough, but like saxophone player would go up to the vocalist mic maybe. That's about it. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how did those rhythm sections move and compel 5, 6, 7,000 people to dance powerfully while at the same time having no amplification and not playing so loudly that they would drown out the horns? And this is magic. And so what's cool about the Count Basie rhythm section, if you really analyze, I mean, between the bass drum, which is maybe the lowest frequency, up to the cymbals, which is the highest frequency, and in between you have the bass, the upright bass, the guitar, and the piano spread throughout. They're covering the entire sonic spectrum from super low to super high. And they figured out a way to move those quarter notes and to move air together so that people were being hit by blasts of sound every quarter note that had, and the way I talk about the feel of, it started earlier. It started with the earliest jazz and maybe probably even earlier with the ragtime kind of feel. But I talk about something called the American Pulse with my students. And the idea is that African-American interpretation of European-American musical constructs and instruments and scales and rules and things created this American Pulse. And when I say American Pulse, what I mean is that it's a pulse that has two things happening simultaneously that shouldn't be able to happen simultaneously. It has forward momentum, but it also feels laid back, right? So think about a song like Freddie Freeloader, right? Which is a song I always start with my students. You took a couple lessons with me and we worked on Freddie Freeloader. But the idea is that if you listen to Freddie Freeloader, it is the most toe-tapping, grooving song. People just really get into it. At the same time, it is insanely laid back and in the pocket. And if you think about American music throughout the years, whether it's jazz or big band swing or bebop or rhythm and blues or early rock and roll or funk or hip hop and all the British invasion stuff, because they were influenced by those styles, that's the character of the music, is that it has forward momentum and it's also laid back. And that is very appealing to humans. And that is why American popular music continues to kind of be at the core of the world's popular music. Not exclusively, but like, I just watched the World Cup finale and you have Shakira was on, BTS, the Korean K-pop band, was on. I mean, that stuff is so influenced by American stuff. The Koreans maybe sing in Korean. Shakira is there's influence of Latin music, but there's still this idea of forward momentum, but also laid back, that is really at the core. And certainly it's at the core of all drum set styles that have evolved. If you think the drum set started right after the Civil War or by the end of the 20th century, it starts in America kind of in one spot and it just grows out like that. But you could trace it back, and that feeling of the music is what is key. So anyway, that's the All-American Rhythm section, but I'm going to digress. I'll just tell you that right now. But it's so fascinating to understand the history of these things and see how things came together and where the influence was and all of that. It's fascinating.
I agree. So right around 92, you began your 4-year private study with Freddie Gruber, and shortly after in 94, you joined Royal Crown Revue. When you first sat down with Freddie as a young freelance drummer in LA, what are some of the greatest takeaways from that experience?
Oh my God. Well, I had taken from a lot of my teachers at the Dick Grove School of Music, which is where I was a student. I studied with Steve Houghton, Emil Richards, for God's sake, he was my mallet instructor, and he played on every great movie soundtrack. He's the bongo player on the Mission Impossible theme. He's played with Sinatra. He's on thousands of movie soundtracks. I studied with some amazing, amazing teachers. Chuck Silverman was my Latin teacher. John Ferraro, who played with Larry Carlton for years, was my contemporary drum set teacher. I called up Freddie Gruber because I'd heard his name from many different people in Los Angeles, that he was the guy that you wanted to study with, that Steve Smith was studying with him. A lot of big name drummers. Joey Waronker, who's playing with Roger Waters now, and took over in REM when their drummer left. Just big name. And he taught Adam Nussbaum out here in New York, Joey Barron. A lot of people had worked with Freddie. So I said, okay, music school, that was amazing, but I want to keep going. And I call up Freddie about 11 o'clock in the morning. The first thing he does, he cusses me out and yells at me for about 10 minutes for waking him up.
Okay.
And then after all that, he goes, okay, come on Tuesday at 5. Click. And so this guy, I entered his crazy world. I like to say, like Neil Peart in the Rush documentary says, he was the Yoda of drumming. And he really was, in the sense that when you went to his house to study, it was like this kind of strange planet. He was a chain smoker, so it was kind of dank and stinky. But then you'd look down, piles of stuff on the tables, and there'd be a picture from like Mitch Mitchell. It's like, Freddie, love you, mate. And then there's a picture of him with Papa Joe Jones and Buddy Rich on the wall. There's pictures of him practicing with Buddy, and then the stories. He had truly dedicated his entire life to drumming. And he was a drug addict his whole life as well. So that was kind of his other passion, I guess, although maybe not intentionally. But, he had never married. He had no kids. He was just drums 24/7. And he was a philosopher. He was a brilliant guy. He was a chain smoker. He was a giant pain in the ass. He was a mess, and he was the most together person ever. So what I realized very quickly was that I didn't know. I'd been playing for 15 years at that point. I considered myself a pro drummer. I didn't know shit. I knew nothing about nothing. But I always felt in the back of my mind that there was something I was missing in my studies. There was something that I wasn't getting. And I've translated this in my own teaching with my own students, but I was getting the patterns, which is mostly what drum education is about, right? Learn these different patterns, and this bunch of patterns. If you're doing those patterns, you're playing this style. If you're doing those patterns, you're playing that style. And there was a lot about what to do, but very little about how to do it. And that was Freddie's entire thing. What he had done was deconstruct drumming, taken it back and broken it down to these very fundamental motions and movements. And that's what you would start out learning from him. And at first I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. He didn't make it easy. Like Yoda, he sort of spoke in riddles and backward sentences. He was kind of afraid that if he ever made a book or a DVD or a video, that somehow everyone would have his information and nobody would want to study with him. It's that mentality.
So a little paranoid. Crazy.
It's like John Philip
smart.
Sousa. John Philip Sousa played over 15,000 concerts in his career, and he did not want to make recordings because he was afraid that if he recorded, nobody would come to his concerts. It's kind of mind-blowing that we think about that,
It's interesting. I didn't know that.
as a philosophy. And honestly, I kind of think about that in terms of streaming today, that music is so easily accessible to everybody. Does that mean people aren't going out to see concerts anymore? Maybe John Philip Sousa was right in the long run. I don't know.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think if you like music and you see something that you love, you're going to want to go see that live. That would be my natural inclination. So anyway, not to get too far afield, but Freddie, it was mysterious. Then I started to get it. And then I realized how powerful it was, because what you were learning was more than just a bunch of patterns. You were developing a relationship with the sticks, with the surfaces, with how you get from place to place. You developed a relationship with the pulse. He taught you about what that pulse was. And it's not for the faint of heart. It people who study with me, if you really want the shit, it's a long process and takes hard work. And it was lucky for me. I was just out of music school. I had not much going on in the way of gigs. I certainly wasn't touring with anybody. So I was able to, it was a tough time because this material is very difficult. I wouldn't say it's not difficult. It just takes some patience, and you got to slow down and think about things very differently. You can't think about that you're playing the drums when you're practicing this. You have to practice the stuff for its own sake. But if you do that and you really take it seriously, all of a sudden your playing gets better. It's kind of like the hypnotist, they put you under, they say some stuff and tweak your subconscious, and suddenly you wake up and say you don't want to smoke anymore. Why? But so it's sort of like he would always say, don't do what I'm teaching you. Don't do that on the bandstand. And when you're practicing what I'm teaching you, don't do what you do on the bandstand. Like, keep those two things separate and really practice this and play. When you get up to play, just play. Let it come from the heart. And eventually those things start to come together. So Freddie was, he seemed like a mess, but he really had a very, very deep knowledge. And he had been teaching since the late 50s. Don Lombardi, the president, owner, and founder of DW, was his student.
That's amazing.
And Freddie gave Don some of the seed money to start DW in 1972. So Freddie was, he was a lot. And, he would say, come at 5. And when I would arrive at 5, there would be 2 other students, one student in with him and 2 others in the waiting room, in the living room, all practicing on pads. And sometimes, generally, my lesson did not start before 9 or 10 at night.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes I didn't finish until 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 a.m. That wasn't often, but I drove home when the sun was up the next day on more than one occasion. And thankfully, as hard as that was, I had the time to do it, And I always remember after every single lesson, I would leave with 2 concurrent feelings. Number 1, I suck so bad. I'm never going to get this. I should just quit. And number 2, holy shit, if I can get this, man, it's going to be awesome.
And look at you now.
And I would feel both of those things. Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of work, but and one thing that was really nice is that, Freddie he could be pretty cruel. He could cut you down. He could mess with your head. And one of the things that he would always do that kind of bugged me is he would always name drop. So he'd be like, yeah, my student, Ian Wallace, who had played with King Crimson and was a famous drummer. My student, Joey Waronker, and talk about how great they're doing. He's playing with so-and-so. He's great. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there like feeling like a schlub. And a bunch of years later, somebody came to me and said he name dropped me. I just thought that was
and that's how
hilarious.
You knew it arrived. Yeah,
that's when I knew. Yeah, maybe I was doing okay. It was just, But he was a character, and he was an acquired taste for sure. But I feel so blessed that I had a chance to become friends with him, and I'll show you one of my favorite keepsakes. I always have to show this to people. This is a picture of me. Can you see with the glare?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So that's myself and Freddie Gruber and Louis Bellson and Earl Palmer. And these guys,
beautiful.
I got to know them all. I became friends with all of them, and many, many other legendary drummers. But these 3, in some ways, maybe are my most important teachers for all their various contributions. And they really all had different kind of contributions. But I got this photo taken at the NAMM show, and I got them all to sign it with a gold pen. And
that is beautiful.
Yeah, so that's truly one of my most treasured possessions is this picture. And I keep it right here above where I teach in my office just to remind me that, like, good Lord, that I got to breathe the same air as these guys. Of course, they're all gone now. And, there were many, many others that I became very good friends with as well. That's the nice thing. I mean, Earl Palmer to me is maybe the most legendary drummer ever, but he was so accessible. Louis Bellson, we became great friends. I mean, it's cool being a drummer.
It is. And the thing that I found with drummers of that level is they're willing, like yourself, they're willing to pass the torch. They take pride in it. I've reached out to some of the greatest drummers in the world. You know, I email you and you're like, yep, let's do it. And other people too. And so I think it's a community of people that want to pass the torch on. If you're serious.
I would agree. And I think drummers by nature, because of what we do and that we grow up schlepping gear and we're always in the back of the band making everybody else look good and are often kind of anonymous, I think that we have humility, we understand the value of hard work, and we have a sense of community that I don't know exists among other instrumentalists. I'm sure it does, but we have our own thing and I love it.
Right. I agree. So if we look at your kit right now, it is a fascinating layout. As a left-handed drummer who uses reverse traditional grip, how exactly do you set up your drum set to make everything work together?
I set it up just like everybody else.
Okay.
You know? So let me put it to you this way regarding the left-handed thing. There's a famous quote, of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, right? They were the most famous dance team maybe of all time. They made 12 movies together in the 1930s. They were hugely famous. And people say, man, that Fred Astaire, what a dancer and what just a legendary dancer. People forget that his partner, Ginger Rogers, did all the same steps, but she did them backwards and in heels.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So that is how I feel about left-handed drummers. We do everything everybody else does, but we have to do it backwards and in heels. So what that means is, if you set up, and by the way, I'm not including drummers who are left-handed in real life and then set up a right-handed drum kit, like Ringo. That doesn't count, okay? Or Carter Beauford, who leads with his left hand, plays open-handed. Okay, that's something, but still on a right-handed drum set. If you're what I call a full lefty, you have to suffer some slings and arrows in your life as a drummer. But we are used to watching right-handed drummers and automatically reversing all the sticking. We're used to looking at books and notation and automatically reversing the R's and the L's. We do it without even thinking about it. And it kind of pisses me off sometimes because I have, some videos on YouTube that have gotten a good number of views over the years. And a lot of the comments are very hostile and ignorant. And people say, well, I need a mirror to look at this. I can't watch this, and it's like,
yeah.
Well, guess what? Lefties, we do that all the time without even thinking about it, and we don't complain about it, Not to mention sitting in and turning other people's drums around and all that crap. But I actually wrote an article once about the history of left-handed drumming because there are famous left-handed drummers going all the way back in the 1920s. The first real lefty drummer that I could see was a guy named Chauncey Morehouse, who was quite famous in the Gene Goldkett band. There was a very famous swing drummer. Oh God, I can't remember his name. He played with Woody Herman in his first big band. He was a lefty, set up lefty. Stan Levy, the famous bebop drummer, was a lefty. Joe Porcaro was a lefty. Did all those movie soundtracks right there with Emil Richards in L.A. Of course, Ian Pace, my drum hero, Phil Collins. So we're out there. But what I do want to say about the right-handed traditional grip, right, is that I learned that from Freddie. When I went to Freddie Gruber, I said, I had learned left-hand traditional grip because I was in marching band and we had to play uniformly. But when I was playing drum set, I really wanted to learn it on my right hand. And Freddie just taught me the way he would teach anybody. It's our hands are the same. Yeah. I literally had somebody on YouTube or Facebook or something argue with me that it was physically impossible to play the traditional grip with your right hand. And I'm just like, dude, look, just watch the video. I'm doing it. So I don't know what you're talking about. The other benefit of being a lefty, and this is great, is that when I teach a lot online, I have a big teaching practice and have been online teaching for a long time. And when you're a left-handed drummer and you sit across from somebody, it's a perfect mirror image.
Right.
So mostly when you're doing online teaching, you have to go crossways, right? Because the person's right hand is here on this side, and then the right hand is here. With me, it's easier to learn. So I call that a benefit of being a lefty.
That's true. Recently in the last 2 years, I've stopped guiding my beginning students, and most of them are right-handed people, but let them choose if they're going to play cross-handed or open-handed. 90% of them choose to play open-handed. Jake Summers was kind of the inspiration behind that, but it seems like at some point in our lives, right-handed players want to play open-handed. He's a left-handed player, but it's interesting how young people start and they naturally gravitate towards playing open-handed.
It makes a lot more sense,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the cross thing was because originally everybody played traditional grip. So when the hi-hat showed up and you were going to play it with a stick, you didn't play it like this because your snare drum was still slanted. So you're still using traditional for the snare. So you would cross. And very interestingly, the first drum set players, if you imagine this is my snare drum and this is my hi-hat, they actually put the snare drum hand on top of the hi-hat hand. And the reason for that is that the first hi-hats were so unadjustable. You couldn't raise or lower them. And so they were very low. And they weren't really meant as primary timekeepers at the beginning. So the focal point was still on the snare, and this was sort of there as help. And there's a famous video of Buddy Rich playing Hawaiian War Chant, which was his big feature. It was his version of Sing, Sing, Sing that he did with Tommy Dorsey. And he's doing it in this movie called Ship Ahoy from 1935. So if you are interested, put in Buddy Rich Hawaiian War Chant 1935 Ship Ahoy.
Okay.
And you'll see him use that technique. It's spectacular.
That's interesting. Okay, I'll look that up.
Try to do it now, though. It's freaking hard. We can't do that because we're so used to having the hi-hat on top.
Yeah. That's great. So you built this brilliant curriculum around the throw-up exercise to teach the relationship between accents, taps, and natural rebounds. Yeah. For a student who is completely new to this concept, how do you explain the physics of letting the drum head do the heavy lifting of returning the stick rather than using the muscle to pull it back up?
Right. So I have named my teaching system the motion-based system. And as I mentioned earlier, I named it that specifically as a counter to what I would call the pattern-based system, which is how 99% of drum education generally works. So the idea is, and this is certainly, I credit Freddie with really exposing me to this, but I've sort of really run with it in the last 25 years and turned it into my own kind of system, for lack of a better term, or approach. Freddie would say approach. But the idea is that if we think about if we even go back, we could break all drumming into two fundamental movements or motions. And if you think about digital language, you can always break that down to ones and zeros, right? So no matter what kind of code or whatever, it's sort of also like molecules. Those can always be broken down into atoms. So we have these very, very fundamental particles that we could build other things out of. So the two fundamental aspects of drumming that are my building blocks, really all drummers' building blocks, I just kind of frame it in this way, are strokes and taps. So what do I mean? Strokes involve downward force. So if we're throwing the stick down using downward force, then I would call that a stroke. On the other hand, a tap, we're using upward force and then allowing the stick to fall back down or drop back down. Now, that's a very, very, very oversimplified way of explaining these two elements, but one uses downward force and one uses upward force. And I think one of the biggest issues with drummers is they never think about the up. They don't think about the time when they're playing where they're setting up to strike the drum, right? Whether it's a rebound after a stroke, for example, or whether it's setting up a lift and then you've already got that height. So now all you have to do is let the stick fall back down. right? Without effort. And in both those cases where you throw the stick and get a rebound, or you lift the stick up and let it drop, what that means is you're only working half the time. Right? I think a big problem is because we don't talk about these issues. Most students go to a teacher and they're just sort of like, well, here, hold the sticks like this. And now let's work on this Nirvana song or this 21 Pilot song or whatever. Because teachers are horrified that if the student gets bored, they're going to split, and that's that. And to some degree, I think, unfortunately, we've gotten so far away from teaching technique as a part of what we do that that's the case. But sorry, if you're going to learn a violin or a clarinet, or a guitar, you have to develop some technique just to get a sound out of the instrument. So I think a lot of this stuff about, we can't teach technique, I don't want to criticize, but I do think it's a little bit of laziness, And I also think that over the years, people have become used to somehow teaching without really getting too much into technique. I shouldn't be negative about it because you want to keep your student interested, but
you do. I think there's a balance. And also, I know for myself, the older we get, the more that technique is important, because not only does it minimize the effort that we have to put into it, it also saves our bodies and keeps our bodies
very true,
in shape. And if we're using bad technique, then,
here comes the
we're
pain.
Suffering. Yeah.
Here comes the itis, all the terms with itis at the end of them. Well, and what's hilarious is that, I tell my students, and people think when they get injured that somehow it's some endemic problem in their body. No, I would say 90% of injuries from drumming are related to bad technique and tension. Holding tension in the body and not knowing how to hold your stick or how to strike your drum or, those things. And if you can spend a little time to unwind some of that, generally your injury will go away. But as usual, in our society today, people want a quick fix. People, and there's a lot of people selling quick fixes out there, let's be frank, in drum world. And a lot of it is, whatever. It is what it is. But, I think because I'm sort of like, the spokesman for technique, because I never paid any attention to technique when I was young. I didn't want to learn it like most kids. I just wanted to play. And when I got to music school, I developed tendonitis and carpal tunnel syndrome in the first 6 weeks of being there, because I went from practicing 8 hours a week to 8 hours a day. And I always tell my students, as bad as your technique may be, mine was worse. I mean, I had my hands were bent into claws and twisted, and I was sitting hunched over. It wasn't good. So for me, when I went to Freddie and I learned all this stuff, and it's like I emerged and I sat up and I had great posture and I started really moving around the drums freely and easily and beautifully. It was like, oh, wow, everybody needs to learn this. So
yes.
To me, technique is a huge thing. Now, it's not for everybody. But it's kind of, I feel like I'm doing people an injustice if I'm not teaching them the why behind the what. That's just my personal approach as a teacher. And I'm willing to get in the mud with anybody and go for it if they're willing to go for it. It doesn't matter how experienced you are, or how good you are, or how old you are. I have young students who are very motivated. I had a kid, started him at 7, and he wanted the technique and worked his butt off. And, in 5 years or 6 years of working with him, I got him playing jazz, double bass, rock, and he was killing. He was like the king of the school of rock. He was in demand. And now he's going to probably go to MSM, Manhattan School of Music. He started doing their summer programs. And so in any case, I also think if you're open to it, you can learn technique without it having to be a drag. I wish I had me as a teacher when I was 7, because I would have gotten into it, I went to the principal percussionist of the Honolulu Symphony. I mean, and she was a woman, which was pretty unusual. It's just that her way of teaching sucked. She was accomplished, but it was like, okay, today we do page 5. Today we do page 6. It was just like, there was nothing. There was nothing to inspire me. And meanwhile, I'm watching, Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, which was in theaters, and like, oh my God, I love that, and like getting really turned on. And it was just like, rock is bullshit. My first drum set teacher, all that rock crap. This is 1979. So you had a lot of teachers that really still felt that way, who grew up in another era where jazz was it. So I think if I'd had a better teacher, I would have been a better student earlier on. But once I met Bob Galati and Freddie Gruber, I was like, these are the hippest motherfuckers in the world. And what they're teaching is the most glorious stuff ever. So anyway, to go back to your question, strokes and taps. And then there are 3 other motions that I've named. There's 2 kinds of taps, by the way. Then there's 3 other motions. First, if we want to take a stroke and a tap and put them together in a 2-stroke combination, there's the stroke-tap combination. So how do you combine a tap with a stroke? And there's many ways to do that, but that's a fundamental exercise. The 4th fundamental is called the 3-stroke motion, right? Because if you have a 2-stroke motion that you could use for 8th notes or 16th notes, you have a 3-stroke motion, which would be used for triplets, right? So there's that. And then the 5th and final of the fundamentals, the 5 fundamental motions, I call them, is called pop and drop. And that allows you to play a stroke that immediately goes into a tap. So it pops and drops. So that's a stroke we strike, but then it comes up and falls down. That's a tap. So it's a different way of combining strokes and taps. But if you go fast, say you want to use the Moeller technique, or you want to play fast paradiddles or fast, rolls or whatever, you need to be able to integrate pop and drop. So that's a key element. And out of those 5, I can build anything else you want to play. Any fill, any rudiment, any groove, doesn't matter. There's a similar course of study with the feet, developing something's called constant release motion, which basically means that if the beater, let's say here's the head and here's the beater, right, of the pedal. If the beater is just sitting there, not moving, we would call that it's in a released position, meaning that there's no spring tension on it, right?
Okay.
So we can get it to release by pushing in and then releasing it again. And we could do that by either coming forward and lifting up, right? So that pushes forwards and releases it. As we come up, it releases. We can also do that by coming down and rolling through the foot from toes to heel. That lets it come down and release. So the idea of a constant release motion, which is sort of the equivalent of the throw-up exercise. By the way, the throw-up exercise is the number 1 of the 5 fundamentals. I don't know if I mentioned that. So that's the very first thing I teach all my students. And by throw-up, what I mean is we're playing a series of strokes and then following the rebound up. And we're learning how to really understand that up. Anybody can strike down, but to strike down and come up and do it in this way that I teach it is actually really hard. And it's hard for very experienced drummers as well. We worked on that exercise.
Yes.
And it's not only good enough to like do it. I can do it. Doesn't matter. Like good enough is not enough. So I would say there's a difference between I can do it and making music, right? So we have to get into that. So anyway, in teaching these 5 fundamentals, after we learn the 5, and that usually takes at least 6 months. I mean, it's you would think, well, what's so hard about that? Well, what we're also learning while we're doing that is we're truly learning the real nuts and bolts of the grips, the German grip, the French grip, and the traditional grip. And we're learning how to create these 5 fundamentals in those grips. We're also doing these exercises very slowly, which most drummers hate, right? What are the 2 things drummers hate most? Playing slowly, playing softly. We confront that in working on these 5 fundamentals. We also begin to understand more about how powerful the up is. I always say it's all about the up. The down is for free. The down is for free because you have gravity, which is a perfect force pushing down on you, and you have an arm or a hand, right? Or, an arm or a hand, which are heavy, and they don't change in weight at least not once you get to be an adult, usually, or you might gain a bunch of weight over 10 years. But the point is, if we could utilize the weight of our arm and let it drop using the perfect force of gravity, our drops will be perfect and they're free. We don't have to play them. Now, of course, eventually you'll learn to utilize more downward force. But if you could think more about the up and let the down happen, that helps. So just one more thing about this. At the end of the 5 fundamentals, we then do the molar exercise. We develop molar because molar utilizes all of these things. It uses gravity, it uses rebound, it uses grip and fulcrum and balance. It uses motions to create the initial stroke of the molar. And molar is sort of your graduation exercise from those first 5 fundamentals.
Okay.
Again, molar is something that is not well understood, is poorly taught so much on the internet. People try to do all these motions. They don't really even understand what Sanford Moeller was doing. So the idea is if you could use these 5 fundamentals and create molar, that's a great way of sort of putting it all together, you know? And then we move on from there to all kinds of different things.
Cool.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, if you want to come and just study jazz or study rock, we don't even have to do the 5 fundamentals. But I'm going to sneak some of that stuff in.
Yeah.
You know.
It's important.
So it's important, but, you know, there's levels of depth you can go with it. And, you know, depending on people's time and their energy and their effort and their budget and all that, we can, you know, devise the right course of study. So I'm not one of those people that's like, you must do my course of study, or this is the way we do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Before World Tours and hit sequels and the Century Project, there was a young drummer stepping into the room with Royal Crown Revue for the very first audition. When you first counted off the tune with them in the early days, did you immediately feel that it was the vehicle that would define the next 20 years of your life, or?
No, but I knew it was something special. So just for backstory, Royal Crown Revue, which is it's a mouthful, was a band that I was a part of from 1994 until 2013 was our last gig. But so that was 19 years, but I'm still a part owner. And we actually, Lisa, you're first to get the scoop. We're going to do a gig again.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but we're doing it not with our previous lead singer. We sort of have parted ways with him, but we're doing it with this incredible woman named Gunhild Carling, who I work with quite a bit. Our tenor player, Mondo, works with her on the West Coast. She is like Sweden's queen of swing. She is a volcano of energy. She plays like 19 instruments. She tap dances, sings. She is a powerhouse performer and a superstar in her own right. And so it's going to be Gunhild Carling meets Royal Crown Revue. It's going to be a meeting of 2 swing forces, and that's why I'm so excited. It's kind of be a new thing for us. So she's going to do some of our material, we're going to do some of her material, and the gig we're playing is called the Rockabilly Q Festival in Fort Myers, Florida. It's a big rockabilly festival. This is the 6th year. It's happening November 14th, 2026, and literally they just announced it yesterday. Yeah. So I'm super excited to let our fan base know, and it's, you know, I think we're just treating it as a one-off right now, but it is sort of a new beginning, perhaps, and I'm super pumped to get back in the ring with my boys, you know, because it's all the guys, and go to town on this material, because we have been out of commission for too long, and I do very different things in New York. I do some swing gigs, but I play mostly a lot of jazz, and I tour with one of the Real Housewives of New York, which is a trip. That's a pop and rock gig, and have my own projects. But Royal Crown Revue is still going. So
that's fantastic.
I'm excited about that. But
I hope it's more than just a one-off.
Me too. I think it might be. We'll have to see how it goes, but I'm pretty excited, and I think it's going to be powerful. I think it's going to be really powerful musically. It's going to knock people out. So just to go back to your question, sorry, as you know, I take a lot of tangents and detours and things. So I actually went to music school at this place, the Dick Grove School of Music. And through the music school, I met a couple of people who were already members in Royal Crown Revue. And I started jamming with them with a side project of Royal Crown Revue that was called the Jazz Jury. Royal Crown Revue is a band that started in '89, and it really was the first band that set the tone for the whole swing resurgence of the '90s.
Yeah.
They were the first ones to kind of dress in that kind of zoot suit style, because our tenor player, who's my partner in owning the band today, his father was an original Pachuco in South LA back in the 50s and 60s and wore authentic zoot suit when it was like, it's kind of like if you were a punk rocker and you had a mohawk in the 70s, just walking outside, you could get your ass kicked. It was like that being Latino and wearing a zoot suit at that time period. It was not a fashion. It was a fashion statement, but it was a political statement as well. So he was OG in that sense. Our lead singer at the time, Eddie Nichols, was, his father was a jazz singer in New York. His mom was a ballet dancer, very high-level ballet dancer, and he was a true blue skinhead punk rocker from the earliest days. So he would have, Ramones on one side of his mixtape and Frank Sinatra on the other.
Oh, that's beautiful.
This combination created something really unique. It wasn't like a nostalgia throwback thing. It was that there was a whole generation that had come up in punk that were getting a little old to be slashing around in the mosh pits, that they were wanting something a little more substance as they grew up in the world. And they realized that styles like rockabilly and early rock and roll and rhythm and blues, black rhythm and blues, and swing and big band music was the rock, the punk rock of its day. That it was always made by young people. In the case of most of these styles of music, young people who didn't have any training, they were just going on aggression and going by their influences. And so at the same time, we talk about all the different things coming together to make it possible. LA in particular, as a desert climate, and many people from sort of the mid-century had retired there in the 60s and 70s. And so you could go to Goodwill and you could find beautiful gabardine suits and old 50s dresses and all the cool stuff that went with that. All the old cars were still preserved, so you could find an old vintage car. And there was just so much stuff that these retirees essentially had brought out with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like my grandparents retired in 1960 to La Crescenta from Chicago area. So you had, and I got a lot of their vintage furniture, trust you me. They're kind of hip mid-century modern furniture that they bought in the 60s, So anyway, not to belabor this point too much, but Royal Crown already was a known entity, and that swing thing was already like a very powerful underground scene. And what was exciting was that as I was playing with this band, the Jazz Jury, I was also studying with Freddie. So all the questions I had about this music that I was learning about, I could ask him, and he knew everybody. He had hung out with everybody. He hung out with Charlie Parker and Lionel Hampton. I mean, it was just, he had a story about every one of these great figures. Or you'd mention some Mez Mesro, this very obscure character, and he would be like, yeah, Mez, he sold the best weed, whatever. So, which he did. I mean, that's what he was known for. So anyway, he was also a jazz sax player, and he lived as a white man in the black community as a black man. It was a very unique story. But so I'm putting all this stuff together while I'm studying with Freddie and while I'm getting to know these guys. And then the issue was that their rhythm section were in a OG Southern California punk band called Youth Brigade. That really was OG. Yeah. Went back, back to the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they would split their time between Royal Crown Revue, and then they would go away to Europe for 2 months doing Youth Brigade. So finally, the guys were pissed because all kinds of producers were coming down, and the place we were playing, the Derby, was becoming the hot spot. Quincy Jones was coming down, and I mean, it was just the lines were around the block. So they said, all right, Daniel, because you're playing in our side project, we think you could do a good job subbing in Royal Crown Revue. Come down and just sit in with us at the Derby, this place, the club, the Derby. So that was my audition. And I went for it, and also another guy sat in. So I didn't have the gig nailed, but they made me the drummer. After a month of me and the new bass player doing the gig, because it was the drummer and the bass player were brothers, the Youth Brigade guys, they kicked them out, and me and the bass player got the job. So it was exciting. And it was an exciting time because everything was about to bubble up. And so within a year, we had management, Ted Templeman, the legendary producer, signed us to Warner Brothers, and we were off to the races, But it was a wild time.
Interesting that you make that connection between punk rock and swing, because that's exactly what happened to me. I was in a touring pop punk band, and then I started. It was a jump blues rockabilly band that turned into a swing band, and I had never thought of it until you said that maybe it was happening with more people, and then it lasted 18 years for me.
Amazing.
And people were really into it in the early 2000s. It was this huge revival.
Huge.
And when you were talking about the early days of these swing ballrooms being packed, it was like that then too. We toured playing swing dance events where they'd give lessons, and then it was this huge event afterwards. It was lovely.
Yeah, it was lovely. And, for the first time ever in 50 years, horn players could actually get laid on the gig, Because suddenly they were cool again. Drummers, we could always get laid, but horn players, that was a, different thing.
Yeah, right. Yes.
And also I should mention that a couple months after I joined, there was always swing dance lessons at the Derby. And the guitar player said to me, "Hey man, you should take some swing dance lessons, because if you know how to swing dance, girls love that. They think that's so cool." So I did. And that very night, I met the woman who I'm now married to.
Oh, see, that was good advice.
But it took a while. We didn't become a couple. Well, we sort of dated for a minute there. That was in 94 that I met her. She moved to New York in 95. And so we stayed friends between 95 and 2007. And we became a couple in 2007. I moved to New York in 2010. We got married in 2013. And now we've been married for 13 years already. It's wild. Life is crazy.
That's fantastic.
So, I can also thank Royal Crown Revue for that. And she's coming down to the gig as well.
That's great.
In Florida. She's coming with me to Florida.
That's cool. Well, you have to schedule something in Kansas City.
I'm hoping that we get back on track, that maybe we could do a tour with Gunhild and the fans will come out, because she has a huge fan base. She was a star in Sweden. She comes from a family band. And she was on Dancing with the Stars in Sweden. She's of that caliber of celebrity in Sweden and all over Europe. But then the smart move she did, her husband got a job at Facebook. So right before the pandemic, they moved to Silicon Valley. And she got hooked up with Postmodern Jukebox. I mean, you probably know what Postmodern Jukebox is. So she did a bunch of videos. If you look up it's like Gunhilda, but Gunhild. And her last name is Carling, Carling. And you put in Postmodern Jukebox. She did a video of Dancing Queen. She did a video of Never Gonna Give You Up, Rick Astley. And those have 5 million, 10 million views, huge numbers. So she tours all over the country as her own artist. And that's why I'm so excited. It's like, we're going to bring our fan bases together. We're going to turn this into a big thing.
That is
At least that's my dream. I got a few months to do it. And then we'll tour. Happen.
Okay. There are many aspects about you that I admire, and one of those is that you're an amazing historian. And your work on this topic is incredibly powerful, because it seems as though you look at the drum set as a reflection of American history. And you curated the Century Project, tracing 100 years of drumming from 1865 to 1965, which I found fascinating. I actually watched that video several times and sent it to every drummer I know.
Thank you so much.
Can you discuss your process and inspiration for that? You touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's so cool.
Well, one of the pivotal things that happened, I say three things happened to me when I moved to Los Angeles in 1991, and really sort of between 92 and 94. I started studying with Freddie Gruber. I joined the band Royal Crown Revue, and I also met, it was a couple more years later, but I met Zorro. Probably know Zorro, the famous funk drummer, also great historian. And we met actually at the Alfred booth at NAMM. And I just walked up to the guy there. His name is Michael Finkelstein. He doesn't work there anymore. I mean, it wasn't even called Alfred. It was called Warner Brothers Publishing back then, and then they got bought by Alfred. But, and I said, I'm in this band, and I've been really interested in doing some writing. I had read Zorro's book, The Commandments of R&B Drumming, and what he did in that book was he took three eras of kind of R&B drumming. He took like soul music from the 60s, funk from the 70s, and kind of 80s, like, rap, hip hop, new jack swing. And he wrote a book, and the way he organized it was just amazing. I was like ripping through the pages because it wasn't just giving you patterns. It was like, here's where Motown comes from, and here's who the drummers were, and here's who's playing on all these famous tracks, and now here's how you play it. And it was just like, God, this is so great. So I wanted to do something like that for the styles of music that I was being exposed to and falling in love with and interviewing guys about with Royal Crown and talking to Freddie Gruber about. So Mike said, well, I'll introduce you to Zorro. He's going to be here tomorrow. And literally the next day I went back, I met Zorro. We immediately hit it off. And it turned out that he was just taking over editing a drum magazine called Stick It Magazine. Mm-hmm. And so he hired me. He loved history. Obviously he wrote that book. And I started writing feature stories for Stick It. I wrote a very long story about Louis Bellson. I wrote a story about the drummers of rockabilly, all of whom I'd interviewed. I wrote a story about a drummer named Johnny Kirkwood, who I'd become very good friends with, who was one of Louis Jordan's drummers. I'm sure in your Jump Blues band, you played a lot of Louis Jordan.
Yeah.
So I, within a short period of time, Zorro was like, well, why don't we work on a book together, and why don't you write the prequel to my book? Because really, the styles I was talking about, swing and rhythm and blues and, rockabilly and some of these things were exactly what led up to where his book began. So I wrote my first book with him. It was called The Commandments of Early Rhythm and Blues Drumming, and that took a long time to come out. But as I was working on that, I said, well, and Zorro did a lot of clinics, and Zorro really just started mentoring me in how you do this, right? At that time, there was, he had a whole system down. He'd written his books and done his DVDs and did tons of clinics. It was a very clinic-friendly world at that time. Drummers went out to clinics. They don't do that so much now because the internet is so omnipresent, but it really wasn't in the late 90s yet. And so I started doing clinics, and as I started doing clinics, the more information I learned, my starting point kept going back and back and back, and because I kept adding things. And by the time a couple of years ago, I was doing a 3-hour clinic, and you would say, "Oh God, nobody's going to sit there and listen to you talk about history for 3 hours." And a lot of people were like, "History? Nobody's interested in history," But I mean, I literally, I'm not going to name him, but he was the president of PAS. He was one of my mentors in school, and he literally told me, "Don't waste your time. Nobody's interested in history. Why would you? You can't make any money from history." So I was like, okay. I took that in stride, and I just kept going because Zorro was so positive. He's like, dude, nobody's doing this. Everybody told me those things, and look what I've done. So anyway, I started, putting out products and doing this 3-hour clinic. And what I noticed at the 3-hour clinic is that people were like on the edge of their seats. And I think it was because my experience with Royal Crown Revue is that we thought a lot about how are we going to present this old-timey music so that people have a completely fresh take on it, and it hits them with the same punch in the gut that a rock and roll concert would. And we had kind of figured that secret out, and we're always talking about it, working on it. So I decided to try to put the same concept in the clinics I was doing, and kind of copied Zorro's format for the book that I was writing, and it all worked. People loved it. So around that time, Don Lombardi started Drum Channel, and I went out to do some kind of clinic and thing, educational thing for Drum Channel, and he was like, let's do a DVD of your clinic. And that was where the Century Project came from. And the reason that I call it the Century Project, which you alluded to a minute ago, is that the drum set really started to come together as the entity we know it today, with sort of bass drum, snare drum, and a cymbal, around shortly after the end of the Civil War, which is 1865. And by the time you move through 100 years of history, all the elements have been added to the drum set. The way that we play it has evolved through all these different eras. And by the time you get to 1965, the British invasion, by that point in time, the drum set as the blueprint for what we would consider a modern drum set today was in place. We had ride cymbals, we had crash cymbals, we had fills that would go from high toms to low toms, crashing on one. We would keep time on a hi-hat. We were playing straight eighth grooves with a backbeat on 2 and 4. And, and with Ringo on the Beatles, that Ed Sullivan appearance that the Beatles did in 64, the year before, but every young drummer then started playing match grip. So without bothering with what we now call traditional grip, which by the way, at that time was just called, here's how you hold the stick in your left hand.
Yeah.
It wasn't, there was no traditional versus something else, because it wasn't traditional. It was the way you played the drums. Every drummer learned that way. And so that sea change of 1965 really set the tone for everything that's come since. And we have electronic drums and we have giant, Terry Bozzio size kits and, but at the end of the day, the drum set is still the drum set. And in a pop kind of a setting, we still use it the same way that Ringo was using it at 65. But if you think about the way a drummer played a drum set in the 20s versus the 30s versus the 40s versus the 50s, they were all completely different. The drum set was completely different. Time was kept on different parts of the drum set. Fills were played differently. It was a whole another animal, and it changed massively over that period. So that's why I said, okay, let's grab this 100-year period. It's arbitrary, but let's go 1865, 1965, and we'll call it the Century Project. Like, the one thing I did not want to call it was the history of the drum set, because I think that would have been the kiss of doom. But people are like, the Century Project, what does that mean? So it ended up being a wise move on my part. And
it was phenomenal. It is a phenomenal video. And I will still probably watch it a few more times and take notes, because outside of that, I've watched, your interview on Drumeo, and it's just, yes, you have the gift to gab, packed full of information. I mean, I think you could talk for hours just about different parts of history, which I love. Like, I'm so interested in it, and it's all in your brain.
Yeah. And, I sort of have this feeling of like, I owe it to these people, these drummers that are now no longer with us, these 3 guys for starters. But like, my feeling is that as drummers, we tend to get very myopic. We get put in a little box, and we think of that like we are somehow unique, and that the way we do it and our immediate influences, that's all we have to draw on. And the way I think about it now that I've studied all this stuff is like, we are part of this amazing continuum. And if you want to play like your favorite drummers, you should go back and listen to what they listen to.
Right.
And then,
exactly.
Understand, because you can understand better how you can play like them. And now you're expanding your mind and your perspective on the instrument. I think so many drummers just learn their little thing from their little 5 bands they like, and that's all they do. And that can get to be, I don't know, limiting, shall we say. I mean, a lot of people just are very limited because they only keep their focus and their influence in this one little thing with whatever's happening right now. And, I have this list. I made a companion DVD that goes with the Century Project called Traps, which focuses specifically on all the gear. We used all this amazing vintage gear in the Century Project. And it gets down to like, everything you ever wanted to know about gear. So I spent a couple of days with John Aldridge, who used to publish Not So Modern Drummer magazine and is an expert on gear. And I asked him every question I could think of. And then I took all his answers and I went back and found photos of all of these things and ads and old, 8x10s and catalog stuff. And to just, again, tell the whole story, but from the perspective of the gear, if you're like a total gearhead.
Right.
So I feel like if drummers knew more about their own story, I think also a lot of people today with the internet and this and that feel very isolated and feel very alone and feel like unsupported. And somehow for me, in my many year quest as a drummer, I mean, you've been on the same journey. Like we run into things we feel really down about our playing, or we feel really we don't have any inspiration, or we get tired of playing the same stuff over and over again. If you know and learn that you're part of this incredible story and there's so much cool stuff, it just opens you up to like keep it fresh and interesting, I feel, and makes you feel part of something bigger than yourself, And so by the time I sort of got to the end of the project and had done a lot of clinics and, had talked to so many drummers, I felt like I was on this mission. So when I have an opportunity to do an interview, I feel like I got to say so much stuff because there's so much I got to get out here. You know, so that's just me. But I want to share that information.
It's great. I appreciate it. And I realized like halfway through the video, I was like, wait, that's his band playing on the big screen behind. You know what? Yeah, so that's super cool. And William Ludwig that you have in the video with all the little gadgets.
Yeah.
They're in Kansas City now.
Yeah, that's right.
So
I knew that. Yeah. So that's cool. WFL3 drums.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah, he's the greatest. He's the sweetest guy.
So lastly, where can everybody find out what you are doing? If people want to look you up or take lessons
please follow me on social media. All the regular spots. I'm even on TikTok now, so that's, for an old fogey like me, it's like, hey, TikTok, I guess. There's a lot of information on my website, danielglass.com. I encourage people to sign up for my mailing list so that I send out a mailing list once a month or so. One of my great heartbreaks is that I spent 15 years growing a Facebook page that was called Daniel Glass Drummer, Author, Educator. And a couple years ago, it got hacked. And I had to go through this horrible process to get rid of the hackers who posted all kinds of crap on the page. And then for some unknown reason, Facebook took the page down and it's gone. I've spent another year trying to get it back and I'm not having any luck doing that. But that was really like, I posted so much awesome stuff on that page that went all over the internet. And it was a great way to kind of get into my whole vibe because I would post tons of like I know where to find cool old clips and who to look for on YouTube that nobody else is posting. In fact, I think half the stuff that I posted 10 years ago, people are now chopping up into shorts and reposting and, getting credit for.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm trying to get back to that in some shape or form. But the good news is I'm so damn busy that as a player that I'm having less time to do those kind of things. I have an online course if people are interested in if they're interested in all this stuff about the motion-based system. I created an online course a few years ago now, and I can't even follow up on it because I'm so busy. Go to danielglass.com. But I have this online course that I'm going to try to relaunch it in a fairly short period of time coming up because I opened it up for a week twice, then I closed it again. And the idea was I would kind of relaunch it every 6 months, except I've been so busy for the last 4 years, I haven't had a chance to do that. But if people are interested, the online course is a really great way for a typical rock drummer to get into and understand what the motion-based system is all about. And the idea is the whole crux of the course, we just take the very first rock beat that everybody learns at their first drum lesson, doots, dats, doots, dat, and we redo that groove from a completely different perspective, looking at it from the perspective of motions and interdependence and like it's all about the up. And it is the people that took it when it was open were knocked out. And my goal eventually is to try to take this motion-based system and turn it into a series, kind of an online portal where I teach people through online courses and do the private lessons that way. But have I had any time in the last 4 years to work to get that off the ground? No. And the good news is it's because I work more than 200 gigs a year, and I'm also running my own group that I'm trying to get up and running. If people want to study jazz with me, a lot of people come to me for jazz stuff, or swing. I do a jazz intensive in Germany every year called the Daniel Glass European Jazz Intensive. They can go to my website to find out about that. And this year we're happening October 1 through 5. It's at a really cool drum school just south of Frankfurt. And I know it seems weird to go study jazz in Europe when I live in New York. You could just come to New York. We did have the New York Jazz Intensive, and we ran that for 3 years, and it was great, but we lost the venue. And this is actually quite amazing. I bring my trio with me from New York. People get a lot of one-on-one time with me. It's only 12 people max. A lot of one-on-one time with me and the group. And there's a bunch of great concerts that we do, including a band very similar to Royal Crown. Cool. And my trio does our concert, and it's an amazing event. People come. We're intensively there for 5 days. They become like a family. The learning is outrageous, out of this world. And so we still have some spots available. So if people are interested, just send me an email. I'll send you all the details. Write to me, reach out on social media. Say, I'm interested in your jazz intensive. And that's that.
What is your email?
Daniel@danielglass.com. Very simple.
Thank you so much.
Right? Sure. Yeah. Lisa, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah,
I really appreciate your interest. You know, it's like all that stuff with the history kind of came out around between 2003 and 2013. And then when I moved to New York and got really serious about life here, it's kind of a new season evolved. And so I need to get back because I'm talking about that stuff. I'm like, yeah, this stuff's good. And I also have to figure out a way that people can get it, since people don't really buy DVDs anymore, like a good way of streaming it. And I got to make that easily available to people, and start promoting that stuff, because there's so much there, you know. But I have no time, in a good way.
Yeah, that is good. But I think like a lot of universities could use that information and just, it's fantastic. So
thank you. I appreciate that so much.
Great to see you.
You too. I'm so proud of all the stuff you've done, and you're killing it, man. You know, you're also a super busy working drummer, and that's fantastic. And doing this history stuff, I'm happy for you, and it is great to see you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.